the warm welcome, I'm sure, that you got up front. Before I introduce Jennifer and tell you a little bit about the many ways that she's collecting and preserving history in our area, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the museum's directors to this morning's program. I'm Stephen Whitty, the museum's Vice Chair for Design and Exhibits. I'd like to add a special welcome to our museum's annual members. Your memberships help make presentations like this possible, help make the exhibits you see around you possible, and we're very glad you're here today. I'd also like to add we're launching a new membership program today. You'll see we've got a table set up over here with a lot of information about what's going on. One of the highlights is a new membership level that when you join here, your EWM membership card will get you into over 1,000 arts, cultural, botanical gardens, children's museums, military museums, all over North America. So if you're a traveler, it may be something to think about. And of course, when you're in town, it's free admission to the museum and to programs like this. And if you like what we're doing, it also supports everything that we've got going on here. Let's see, and I should mention too, that some of the sites that are on that program also have World War II submarines and battleships. So there's a list over there that will tell you by state. Also, your membership will get you in free or for regular admission for all of our visitors to our series of Anniversary Week events at the end of next month. I'll give you two examples. Rose McReynolds is a distant relative of Captain Altus McReynolds. She has done a documentary film. She's a high school student here in town, and we've invited her to present her documentary and talk about Captain McReynolds. His story is he was a member of the 101st Airborne, parachuted onto Normandy on D-Day, took a shrapnel wound the following day, and then perished the day after that. So this is a very intriguing, very interesting story about how all of that happened. And then that's on Saturday of Anniversary Week. On Sunday of that week, local author Donna Bone, who's sitting in the first chair in the second row, launches her new book. I've got it right here. How Women and Children Helped Win World War II. Dr. Stella Ress from USI will be here that day, and Dr. Ress will interview Donna about her book, and Donna will talk about the research and the subject matter that went into that production. Somebody else from USI is with us here today. It's about high time I talked a little bit about Jennifer Greene. Jennifer is the university archivist at the David Albright Library. While the University Archives and Special Collections acquires and preserves material about the university, it has an important secondary mission to collect history to collect regional history, especially the southwestern region of Indiana. The Archives accepts materials related to our region, as well as making these materials available for research and scholarly projects. I had a chance to see the second part of that mission up close last fall. Jennifer and Dr. Ress put together the community's first history harvest at Evansville Public Library. It was an opportunity to come in and record oral histories, to bring in your artifacts and have them scanned for preservation in the special collection. And also it was a chance for a number of the history students who have projects around World War II or Evansville or the area, for them to present where their research was going. I had a chance to work with them. That was an excellent day. And then those...
We're going to do another one this fall.
They're going to do another one this fall, so that's something different.
We haven't decided on our topic yet, but we're thinking about doing manufacturing. So any of you who have relatives who worked in any of the factories here in town, we want to collect those blue-collar stories. So.
We had another chance, you mentioned manufacturing, something else that we worked on. The museum had a huge file of all of the blueprints for building the Republic Aviation plant just up the street. And that file is now in Jennifer, well, not Jennifer's personal archive, but it's at the university archive. And we had a chance to move that out of storage, and that was a whole production to make that happen. So she is here this morning to talk about Beulah Gray and Badges of Courage. Thank you very much for being here. Thank all of you for being here. And Jennifer, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? All right? Good. Good morning, and thank you so much for coming. Today we are going to talk about Beulah Brazelton Gray and the Badges of Courage. But let's start with who was Beulah. Beulah Brazelton was born to Rosalvo Brown and Laura Capehart Brazelton. Rosalvo served in the 42nd Infantry Volunteer Regiment in the Civil War, where he became friends with who would later become Governor Alvin Hoovey. They were actually lifelong family friends. In fact, Beulah remembers him visiting the house when he was governor and bouncing her on his knee. And for those of you who may not be familiar, the Capehart family is an extremely important family, not only in Indiana, but particularly, I would argue, for the southwestern area. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Capeharts later. She was born March 23rd, 1882 in Petersburg, Indiana. She went on to graduate from the Petersburg High School in 1900. She'd always dreamed of being a writer, so it's very poetic that her dreams finally came true. She attended Normal College for teaching. She went on to teach for a year in Cato, Illinois. And then she married Edward M. Gray on New Year's Day, 1903. On this side, we have Beulah and her sister, this is Beulah and this is her sister, I think. This is Beulah, I don't know, early in life, and this is her wedding dress. It's a little washed out, it's a little hard to see Beulah. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Beulah's character, because I think it really speaks to how the badges and the letters all came to be. When Beulah married Edward Gray, the understanding was that they were going to buy a farm in Petersburg. And he actually bought some land just outside of Otwell. And apparently Beulah was not very happy with this arrangement. And after the birth of her oldest daughter, Edward filed a divorce suit against Beulah for, without his fault and without his consent, and she was guilty of cruel and inhuman treatment of him because she objected to living on the farm and continually scolded and abused him because he would not move back to Petersburg. He pled to the court that he had no land or occupation in Petersburg, just his farm in Otwell. He also claimed that she would say things like, wish his crops would fail and animals die. Now, this is 1911, pretty racy stuff. But Beulah answers the complaint, and she says, with all of her property currently in his house, and showed that she owned nothing to support herself or her newborn child, who was 6 weeks old at the time, or provide for her defense, and the farm was worth about $4,000, ample income to support her during the proceedings. And lastly, she did not desert her husband, but came to Petersburg to visit the family with her baby, and had no means of returning the 14 miles to Otwell, since he refused to send the wagon. He had effectively turned them out on the streets. Beulah was a formidable woman. The hearing was set for later that month, but nothing is recorded. The family reconciled. And although Beulah continued to be unhappy with the arrangements, they did stay together. Later, they moved to Oklahoma, and they were there for, I don't know, only a few years, I think. But they eventually returned to Pike County after the death of their third child. The family then settles in Otwell, in the town. And Edward, in 1916, stops farming and becomes a rural route mail carrier in the area. This would have been buggy and horse delivery. He was known for not only bringing the mail, but bringing the local gossip and news. He actually became pretty popular in the area. In 1920, Beulah started as a reporter for the Otwell Star. She also wrote pieces for the Evansville papers, Louisville, and Indianapolis. During her time as a reporter, she met people like Ida Tarbell and Jean Stanton Porter. For those of you who don't know, Ida Tarbell was an investigative reporter. She was known as a muckraker. She took on Standard Oil and won. Of course, Jean Stratton Porter is a national writer and naturalist. While she was writing for the paper subscription grew, and in 1929 she becomes the editor of the little paper. This paper was usually maybe a couple of pages at most. Under Beulah, at times it grew to be 8 pages long. She added a lot of local history. She added a lot more local news, and people throughout the county came to rely on this little Otwell newspaper for their news. Beulah was always politically active. She was raised in a politically active family. She was a lifelong Democrat supporter. However, she also saw that it wasn't the party, it was the person. And so, for instance, she attended the Cornfield Conference in 1938. This was the great reorganization of the Republican Party here in Indiana. She was there to support Homer Capehart. So even though she was a Democrat and she worked hard to get Democrat people elected in her area, she also, like I said, recognized talent as well. In 1932, Edward passes away in a car accident. Governor candidate Paul V. McNutt came to the Otwell paper to give Beulah his condolences. But regardless of the tragedy, the paper went out on time, even though it was only a week after his death. The obituary for her husband, I believe, appeared on the front page of the Star. And true to her journalistic ethics, she had an assessment of her spouse's character and gregarious personality. She acknowledged his goodness, but also added many faults, which were serious. Honest newswoman to the end. Maybe she never really got over leaving Petersburg. She, of course, wrote about a lot of local news. When the war started, she would follow what she liked to call her boys. In 1955, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles actually gave her an honorarium for her service and patriotism during the war. She was also a historian and a writer. She wrote an early history of Pike County. She actually presented this at Southwestern Indiana Historical Society in 1927, and it's recorded in one of the publications from that organization. She also wrote on the National Lincoln Memorial Highway over the Buffalo Trace. You can see a copy of that on the table. She had researched the Lincoln family route to Illinois. And although her research was found to be more accurate, it was not used due to sinister influences, according to Beulah. I'd like to look more into that. She wrote a history of Presbyterianism in Pike County, and she published numerous pamphlets on local history. She also wrote a biography of Homer Capehart. Senator Capehart was a World War I veteran and, of course, a U.S. Senator here in Indiana. She considered this the crowning achievement of her life. But early on, she was known for her letter writing. The longest known letter was 25 pages. It was written on Christmas Day in 1927, and it actually talks about her presenting to Southwest Indiana Historical Society on the Lincoln Trail to a friend of hers. She resigns from the Otwell, from being editor at the Otwell Star, just a little before the end of the war in 1945. She moves to Evansville and becomes a house mother at the Memorial Baptist Hospital. She wanted to continue to serve her boys. She died in her daughter's home in April of 1964. U.S. Senator Homer Capehart was the first person at the memorial service and the first one to sign her book. World War II begins, and Otwell and Pike County boys go to war. Beulah self-appoints herself a mission to write each one of her boys, and some nurses, at least once a month. She wrote over 150 soldiers. She only asked for an insignia or a patch from their unit as in return. She would show them to visitors and have a complete history of the person's service, and generally knew the entire family history as well. One author, Ralph Gray, in the book over there writes, "The Hoosier soldiers loved to receive her chatty, newsy letters, and they eagerly responded to her request for unit patches. An example of her diligence in this activity is suggested by her apologetic note to one soldier about the brevity of her letter. On Thanksgiving Day in 1944, she wrote, 'Today I have been addressing Christmas greetings to all the boys in service on my mailing list, over 150. But,' she admitted, 'I can't do what I did at first and write personal greetings on each card. I'm only writing to those I know best.'" She also corresponded with an English woman during the war, Elsie Whitehurst. They kind of became pen pals, and we're not going to really deal with Elsie today, but that's a whole other fascinating story on its own. But let's take a look at the people and these wonderful patches. Here you see a compilation of the patches. You can see some of those on the table as well, and it's really hard to get a good image of this, but I want to read this to you. This is the Blood and Fire patch. This is an official patch. It says down below, "Blood and fire, to bleed and burn in expiation of their crimes against humanity, was promised to and planned for our enemies by the United Nations at Casablanca in 1943. Born that year, the 63rd Infantry Division wears the symbol of that promise, prepares for and plans its sure and joyous execution." The symbol that these patches go on to inspire is a story all on its own. My boy Joe. Joe Harris probably collected the most patches. We know he sent at least 30 patches to Beulah. He returns to Petersburg, and they are lifelong friends. Can see the envelopes here, and there's some photocopies of them on the table as well. Steve was mentioning how there's a lot of these colored and designed envelopes that we see during World War II particularly. I saw on the Star where another boy had sent you a soldier patch. I now have about 20, and I hope you'll find it as interesting as I do. Joe Harris. He goes on to say, "I have my own footlocker, and I've glued them in the top of the lid. All the fellows enjoy the new one as much as I do. We have a new outfit in camp, so I may be able to send you one of its patches soon. Tank Destroyer." So there's some of the boys that sent letters and or patches. We know Harold Russell sent patches. This is a postcard from San Francisco. You can see the boys enjoying themselves before they're shipped overseas. This is a menu from a Thanksgiving dinner at the Ahu Islands. It's very hard to read, but I'd like to share some of the things that are on this menu. It's a turkey dinner with the a la Signal Corps. They have wire salad, flashbulb pumpkin pie, whack layer cake, and radiotropical fruits. And you can't see it, but at the very end it says, "and sweets and tobacco." Definitely a sign of the times. This is one of the nurses, Mildred Walker, who was from the area that she wrote with. This is a postcard from the Aleutian Islands that one of the boys sent to her. Although I've had to, this is Dot Oglesthorpe. This is a letter she sent to Beulah. I believe it was her son that died. And you can see the sections here in the letter. Although I've had to throw away many of the letters and cards of condolences, I've kept the letter from you and frequently reread it. Thank you so much. This is how Beulah reached out to people, one-on-one. She wasn't just some faceless being who sent off letters. She got to know these people. She was part of their lives. And you'll see that later on, Dot says, I am also enclosing an insignia of Bernie's. It's the kind worn by the radio men in the Air Corps. The letter does say that she couldn't open the box that the military had sent her for quite some time. And it took her a while to be able to open the box. And then she knew that Bernie would have wanted Beulah to have the patch. This is one of the few letters we have of Beulah's. This is to Joe Harris. And this little part, again, it just kind of speaks to Beulah's character, right? And I owe you thanks, too, for that beautiful tribute at the end of your letter. I do hope I'm a good soldier always. She goes on to talk about how, she wants to be an inspiration, and she wants to remind everyone why they're doing this and how important it is. And although she's just an old woman back in Indiana, she wants to do her part. Now we'll start to look at some of the badges. You'll often find these kinds of regional designs, and I tried to do some research on these badges and the symbolisms behind them, and I gotta tell you, it was really tough. I can find a lot about the units, but not really why these badges were created. It's interesting to note, though, that there's a lot of classical symbolism that we're going to see pop up in the badges. This yin-yang was pretty surprising, though. Today, that's a very common symbol. I'm not sure how common of a symbol that would have been in 1942. We have mostly Army patches, it seems, although we do have some nice Navy ones as well. This is a letter from Joe where he actually draws what the patches are and tells her what they are. You'll see this one up here, it says 2nd Army. When I was putting this show together, I thought that was the badge. And I went back and I started looking through some of the paperwork, and I realized that this is not the 2nd Army badge. This is the 69th Division badge. And I didn't have a very good shot of the 2nd Army, but I thought, well, we'll just leave it in anyway. We gotta love the dice here, because paratroopers, right? I mean, a risky business. A seahorse for the engineering brigade. I guess in a sense that makes logic, because seahorses tether themselves and create bridges. The paratrooper ones are always really good. Couldn't find anything out about this one. And this is not a unit patch. This was a distinguished service patch that the unit developed for some of their soldiers. And then, of course, the nurse's patch. Couldn't identify this guy. Obviously a torpedo. This has to have something to do with the submarines, but again, I was unable to identify it. Also, from talking with Ralph Gray, we suspect this might have literally been kind of a handmade patch that the soldier had, and probably not part of his official uniform. He probably didn't wear it on his regular uniform. Also, this here, the wings and the star, I see this reoccurring in the patches. I'm pretty sure that they are all Army Air Force, but again, it was kind of difficult to, some of them were marked and some weren't. And is it at the end of World War II where the Army Air Force becomes diminished and the regular Air Force kind of takes over, right? Parachute Infantry, Airborne Division. I love the bolt of lightning. And the detail, right, of this eagle soaring away, carrying the trooper away. It's amazing. The Air Transport Command, there's something very modern about that. It kind of seems Seems like a UN symbol almost to me. A classic axe head. This has to be my favorite. The Alaskan Defense Command with the little seal. The 95th, that was another one that I had to go back and keep looking at because I had it the wrong way. It wasn't until I figured out which direction it went. Again, this is only identified as Air Force, but it's got to be Army Air Force with the star in the wings. This one is interesting here. It's got kind of that Islamic shape. And given it's the North African Command Center, that makes sense, but still a little surprising. There are several like that in the collection. Thunderbird Airfield in Arizona. And of course, the 2nd Marine Division. The Flying Star. This is an anti-tank. I don't know if those, when I first saw that, that looked like ivy to me, but I wonder if it's something to do with, you know, like stop sticks, right? Parts of maybe how they would have stopped tanks. And I love the acorn, right? Because we all know from a little acorn grows a mighty oak, right? This one's really fuzzy, but there's lightning bolts coming out in the middle between the wings. And we see that a lot when it has to do with radio or signal corps, that kind of thing. You'll see the lightning bolts. This one I couldn't identify at all. You want to show it? Oh, there we go. 2 wings with crossed hammers. I'm guessing it's an engineering unit of some sort, but could be infantry. There was a question before the program about these. I think these were more standardized than some of the other patches. But again, I think each unit had input as to how they were going to do their own patches. Here's again that Cyrillic almost. Here's the tank destroyers that Joe wrote her about. This is, the way this picture was mounted, I couldn't rotate it. It's not going the right way. This is a camera, and it's actually supposed to be pointing at an angle. Here's a picture of some of the patches laid out before they were mounted. Researching the patches. If you want to see the patch collection, today it is currently housed at the Otwell Public Library, which sits in the Otwell Community Center. You can see it there hanging on the wall along with a lovely picture of Beulah. It's not a very bad drive from here. It's only about 30, 40 minutes. And there's a great place in Petersburg to go and have lunch, coffee and cake. And if you'd like to learn more about these kinds of artifacts, I don't own this collection in particular, but as Steve said, I do have a lot of historic information about the area. I would encourage you to visit our archives, either in person or virtually. You can find things like the American Military History Gallery, which includes Civil War, World War I, Vietnam, World War II materials. We also have an oral history collection with well over 400 oral histories that are either video, transcript, or audio. We also have what we call finding aids. That's just a fancy word for an inventory. So if you wanted to know what kinds of things might be at the archives, this is a place where you could go and look for that. I would also encourage you to follow our blog, amusingartifacts.org. Here you can learn more about the collections, events, and different things that are going on in the archives. We're currently having a project where we are rehydrating Civil War documents. These documents have not been unsealed since 1863, 64, 65. And we are currently trying to bring them back to life so that they can be unfolded. We're going to be chronicling that in amusing artifacts.
Are they local?
Puster Furniture Company, he did move here after the war, but he is not an Evansville native. And if you have any questions or any information, I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody. And if you have questions, I can try to field them.